untraditional strain in the sense that these historical paintings aren't part of the Hindu and the painting tradition in the Bundi area. They split apart, and I think they split apart because the state itself split apart. And the painters who really were interested in this kind of dynamic scene of elephants and of hunting scenes, they went to Kota. The more traditional painters stayed at Bundi. It's hardly decisive, but one comparison that can be made is that the Rao of Bundi, for example, when he is shown by his artist riding on an elephant, as he is up at the top of this picture, it's a very nice, very playful elephant, across a background which is gold and very opulent, with a lot of attention given to the cloth that's over the elephant's back, and to the patterning of the figures on the picture itself. But it's a rather conservative picture compared to the astounding dynamism of the painting below, which is done at Kota, coming out of the same history. They come out of the same history, the same painters who worked on the same walls, who seem to have split apart. And a quieter, more traditional strand of those painters stayed in Bundi. The others of them went to Kota. This is Rao Ram Singh of Kota. It's one of the greatest of all Rajput, as we would say, or Kota paintings, done in the very last part of the 17th century, in which the Raja is pursuing a rhinoceros. But what we're seeing here is this wild, dynamic elephant with the bells on the elephant, for example, that are being whisked into the background as the elephant surges forward, a sense of real sort of energy, quite different from the playful movement of the elephant that's on the top there. What else happens during this period? Earlier, when the elephants are being inspected in those early paintings on the walls of Bundi Fort, fine, they're very nice, they're very playfully depicted, very informally depicted, very warmly, wonderfully depicted. It's a great elephant that's on the left-hand side. But everything, by the time that this tradition is really coming to an end, the end of these elephant depictions that start on the walls of Bundi Fort and at Chunar, where everything in the detail of that rhinoceros hunt is controlled. Every single line, is very carefully put down and so tightly constructed that you get a sense of just tremendous kind of power and energy. Look, for example, at the lines in the ears of the elephant, either the veins or the edges of the ears of the elephant, or the eye in the elephant, for example. All of these things are things that show that these elements of the painting have been distilled and refined and intensified to an enormous degree. Now, in many ways, it's a single strand even from the early Ragamalas, the early elephants from about 1600 to the elephant on the right, which is almost 1700. No single painter could have painted over that period of time. What we don't know is where breaks were. Where, because the painters worked so closely together that it's hard to know, in cases like this at least, where one painter's work ended and an acolyte or another very talented painter's work began. So we're attaching these to a kind of group of painters coming out of the Chunar school rather than a group of individual named painters. There are no names on any of these pictures. I say that this tradition came to an end. Soon after 1700, everything bursts. We have enormous pictures. We have pictures that are not single elephants. We have pictures of elephants in these extraordinary landscapes, such as this scene of elephants being captured by having ropes that are hung in the trees. Elephants are driven under the trees. The ropes are let down on the elephants, and the elephants are captured, with this lotus pond with elephants swimming in it down below, and elephants that are in the mountains up at the upper left-hand side. A new group of artists comes in. It doesn't feel nearly as constrained by this, and I'm really putting this part in for the hardcore art historians that are in the audience, so the one or two that might be here, to introduce a painting that we tried to get into the 2-volume study that we simply could not do because the picture had not arrived. but I'll show you that in a moment. The picture on the left is here. I think these two paintings are by the same painter, a painter named Niju, and they're quite different in many ways, in a sense that the kind of quality of individual lines being set down one by one that we see in these two elephants fighting, that's part of this tradition I've been describing to you, and then this newer tradition where the elephants have much more of a kind of organic, three-dimensional character. These almost look like something that is sort of underwater creatures or something that are up here. It's a very different sensibility. And if you go and they're placed very close to each other upstairs, if you go and look at them carefully, you will see that as well. And I'm comparing that because I think the painting on the left-hand side can be attributed now to this painter that we have. It's a painting that's in the Art Museum in Lucknow. On the right-hand side, it has an inscription, which I put here, again for the hardcore types that give the name of the painter as Niju. The date is 1725. It's the first of these elephant paintings that's signed. And we get in the 18th century, as the walls of the palaces get bigger, as the economic situation gets bigger, we get a tremendous expansion in terms of what's done with paintings. We get paintings that are dated, we get paintings and signed. That's a different situation from the one I've been describing. I can't go into that this afternoon, but it's just one of the things that we have studied in these volumes, and you should be aware of just the kind of the richness and the fact that I'm just pulling out this one strand from this enormous carpet of paintings that are going on in India at the time. I come back to the painting, and very nicely, Oliver Everett virtually ended with this painting as well of the elephant battle, because one can see that they're both wonderful elephants, but they're very, very different in feel in what they're trying to do. And this has led to the idea that, again, the paintings that we call Rajput, that were done for the Maharajas, that were not imperial court paintings, have a very different character and should be studied separately from the paintings that were done at the Mughal court, where the emphasis was on spatial depth, was on texture, was on mass and weight, for example, of the figures, and on very, very specific portraiture, for example. That's not of interest, where you get a study instead of simply the dynamism and the enormous energy of an elephant that you get on the left-hand side. I don't like this distinction anymore that we've built up so much in the past. I think it's rather like, and maybe because I live in the country myself now, I think it's rather like it's a kind of seamlessness. And think of Madho Singh. He moved between both these worlds. He could go and live at the Mughal court. He could go and live at a provincial Mughal capital. He could go and back and live in his, couple of rooms perched on the side of a mountain. He moved seamlessly back and forth between those worlds. It's rather more like, forgive me, I don't live in New York. You come to New York, you want to hear the New York Philharmonic. You want to come to the Met. You want to hear the Metropolitan Opera. You go back home and you're content maybe with chamber music, with having some friends or family play music. It's not a different world. It's a different kind of sensibility, and you move back and forth between all of this range of different ways to approach the world. And certainly we see here, by patrons that move seamlessly between these worlds of a kind of simplicity and ruggedness to the greatest luxury one can imagine. That we're really dealing with a kind of single entity, and we have to study much more than we've been doing the way that these traditions interpenetrate with each other. Thank you all very much.
Thank you, Manavij, for that wonderful journey and superb sort of entry and introduction to this subject, and marvelously so many of the works in the exhibition being elaborated and contextualized, beautifully presented. Thank you. Now, as the time master, I must keep us quickly on schedule. We now, it's a great pleasure to invite Professor B.N. Goswami to introduce the screening of the abridged version of the film on the life of Nansuk, prepared by Eberhard Fischer and Indian colleagues, a beautiful film in which the life of the artist is shot in the palace in which the events depicted in the paintings upstairs took place. And I won't take any more time, but to briefly introduce Professor Goswami, Professor Emeritus of Art History at Punjab University in Chandigarh, and in sum, the most eminent art historian in India today, the guest curator of a number of major exhibitions in Paris, San Francisco, Zurich, and San Diego, and sometimes visiting professor at a number of universities spanning from Heidelberg to Berkeley and UCLA and Austin. Professor B.N. Goswami, thank you.
I'm here to lead you into a gentler world compared to the one that we have seen till now. I'm here essentially to introduce to you a film which was made by my colleague and friend Eberhard Fischer on a single painter who lived in the 18th century in a very, very small state up in the hills, south of Jammu and Kashmir, state called Guler. The man moved on to a smaller state called Jasrota. So why should we be paying attention to this man, either by my writing a book on him or by Eberhard Fischer producing a film on him? Nansuk is the name of the painter. Born 1710, so we think, died, certainly we are sure of, 1778. I will not talk to you about Nansuk so much as about the difficulty of not only tracking the life of a single and individual painter, but also of chancing your arm in trying to reconstruct that kind of life. But let me briefly say to begin with, a book and a film are two different things. I wrote the book. It took about 20 years in putting the material together with some difficulty. And Eberhard produced this film in the course of 1 year. There is a very well-known joke, used to be at one time, a story about the connection between a film and a book, which used to be told in the corridors of Hollywood. It is said that some film company was shooting in a desert, and when they left, the old film strips were left behind. They were just strewed there. And some goat kept grazing, wandered off in that direction, and one of them started munching on a piece of film. And the other goat came up to the first goat and said, "What is it like?" And the first goat said, "The book was better."